So if you want to have a look at the syllabus, you can scan this right now, and I'll walk through this together with you. So what's in this syllabus? This is the general setup. The first few pages are just a few things about aligning expectations with each other. So course description, course objectives, learning outcomes, all the usual stuff that we do and provide at HKU. Things that you should generally consider about this course, reasons why you wouldn't want to take this course if you have all sorts of things that you prefer that are not aligned with our values and what we do over here. Um, general advice. So this is something that I wrote in the middle of the semester last year to help people make the course more effective for them. Teaching philosophy. So I think we can skip all these first ones. You can go over this if you want at home. In terms of the structure and assessment components, 20% of this is going to be individual tasks. Individual task is weekly readings. Starting from week 4, you'll have a variety of readings that you can do. It's going to be either a podcast, a TED Talk, some reading that is coming from a book chapter, or something that's more academic, but still quite light, or some online game or task that might help you understand something that we're studying a little bit better. So each week you can decide which one of the 4 you want to do, but I will ask you to diversify this. So if you took number 1 in week 4, then take number 2 in week 5. So just switch this around a little bit, but I will give you an option of which one you want to do. I just want you to taste a bit of all of that. Of course, if you want to do more than one, that's fantastic. And I'll ask you to summarize those. There's going to be a collaborative Google Doc where you'll reflect on this, see how other people are reflecting, add your own thoughts, and there's some grading on this on a weekly basis. Going back to the structure, there's class engagement, let's call this. So first, it's nice that you're here attending physically, but I would like you to also try and participate. And this involves, at the very least, participating in the Mentimeter, occasionally, perhaps raising your hand or responding to your classmates. I just want to see a little bit of life from you so that we'll have a bit more of an engagement that doesn't all rely on me. It is student-focused learning. Then we'll do some teamwork, group work. We'll, once we know who is here and who is not, we'll separate you into teams. And then I'll ask you to do a team contract. We have a template for team contract. And then at the end of the semester, you'll reflect on what worked, what didn't work according to the team contract, according to each one of the tasks that you've done. Midterm and end term, you'll have peer evaluations to track members in the team and how well they've done and how well they've contributed. One thing to note is that you do have the potential to comment on this. So as you've seen, somebody made a space or something like that, and it appeared. So this is editable. And consider this to be a live document. If something is not clear on this Google Doc, please do write a comment. Please ask me to fill in more details for you. I think right now it has, I don't know, 25 pages. I'm willing to go as high as needed for you to have clarity about this course. So let's treat this as a live document. If there's something that's not clear, please let me know. We'll write a book together. We've already done one book together in previous years. So if you want to see what happened in 2019, you can open this book. The students did like a 200 page book on the credibility revolution, the science reform, the open science movement. And it was really something tremendous to see just how well the students can do. So if you want to go and see how that works, you can go and take some examples from over there. But what you can see over here is that they worked in teams. So this is a team of 5, and they wrote a managerial summary, an in-depth report, all sorts of topics. And then finally, at the end, there was a quiz. So they wrote the quiz on this chapter and provided, of course, all the citations. And on the side, you'll see that me and the TAs and some members of the international community that I recruit on Twitter saying, look at what our students are doing. Can somebody come and give some feedback. And people are coming in and giving you feedback. So one of the nice things is that you'll see what the other students are doing. So this is a live document. You'll see contributions from each member, and the international community can see what it is that you're doing and give you some feedback for you to improve. One important thing that I want to say about all the submissions as a group, as a team, is that you'll have a chance to revise each one of those. So there's a first submission. The first submission is not graded, but we'll provide you with feedback. We'll ask the international community on Twitter to give you feedback. And then at the end of the course, you'll have the opportunity to learn from this feedback and improve. So it's less about perfection in the first submission, but it is about the journey of you first making an effort in the first submission and then being able to learn from the feedback and improve for the final end submission. And only the final end submission is the one that's graded. So you'll see, for example, if we go back to the syllabus, in the schedule, you'll see that the first submission is here for this task, first submission for this task, first submission for this task. And then finally, at the end of the semester, there's the revision. So the first task is submitted here. The second revision is submitted there. So you'll have a chance to get feedback on each and every one of your group projects. So the main point is for you to be able to collaborate, gain some knowledge, see what others are doing, get some feedback, revise based on feedback. This is how we do academic scientific process. So this is about the chapter. The chapter is going to be about influence, persuasion, and behavioral change for doing good. How can we change behavior? How can we influence things for the better? For example, how to get people to be more healthy, commit to all sorts of things that might be good for them, like eating more healthy, eating more green, going to the gym, that sort of thing. In this case, we'll focus much about charitable giving and giving donations, helping the poor, addressing poverty, and so forth. Another team task is designing your own intervention on how to elicit donations and charitable giving, how to make people more altruistic. So we'll do a little bit of that, and there's a sample, there's a template that you'll use in order to design your intervention based on an article. And then we're going to run a bit of a competition. Because of some funding that I got, we'll be able to use that funding in order to run a real live data collection based on your intervention. So each team will do an intervention based on a certain phenomenon in the literature. And then we'll try and see which one is the most effective, which team was able to elicit the most donations. And the way that we do this is that we tell the participants, here are $5. You can either take this or you can donate as much of that as you want to a cause, let's say GiveWell. How much of that they will contribute. So there's going to be a lot more details on how we're going to set that up and how that works and all of that, but it will give you a chance to implement the knowledge that you've gained by writing the chapter, writing the manuscript, to see whether we can do something real in order to increase donations and charitable giving, so that people keep less for themselves and give more to other people. So you can read more about that over there. So let's go back to the assessment. Let's make this a little bit bigger. Yeah, so it's about 25, 25, 20 for all of those. So altogether, you'll get 80% that is group work and 20% that is dependent on your weekly reading and engagement in the class. Any questions about the syllabus? Something that's not clear about what I just went through? Yeah, so it depends. Sometimes I post them on the Open Science Story before the class. But when there's a little bit of a game or an intervention where I also expose the solution and the results, I prefer to do this right after class. After I finish, I immediately upload this, the Open Science Framework. Yeah, good question. Thank you. Anything else? No? Okay. So if something comes up later on, you can use Slack or ask in the classroom next time I ask. So that hopefully gives you some idea of what the class is going to look like. I'll try as much as possible to connect what it is that we do in the lectures to what it is that your interventions, group work is going to be about. So some teasers here and there, but there's not 100% overlap. However, if there's something from your group work or something that you're reading that you want me to talk more about, I'm very happy to. Just let me know. So a big part of judgment decision making or behavioral economics has to do with cognitive biases. And to explain cognitive biases, there's all sorts of approaches, and I choose to use the psychological lens approach to show you some of the famous classic illusions and cognitive biases from the broader psychology, and then talk to you about how this applies to the way that we do judgment and decision making. The McGurk effect. So I'll give you an example. I'll start with the TikTok version. So this really blew up on TikTok. I think they discovered this about a year ago. I was very sad to learn that TikTok is leaving Hong Kong. So we don't have the fortune of addressing that, but I can find a lot of TikTok videos through YouTube. So this is how I got hold of this one. And when I leave Hong Kong to travel around the world, then I find out a few more. So I'll give you an example with this one. So this lady here is going to point to one of two sides. There's going to be a sound. I'll play this a few times so you can follow. And then just choose one of the sides and focus on that and see what you hear. Very likely, just like you said, what it is that we see influences what it is that we hear. So on one side, there was a brainstorm. On the other one, there was green needle. There's no connection between brainstorm and green needle, but the sound remains the same. So if I just run this again, focus on the other one. Do this one last time. Curious kind of phenomenon. How come that it's the exact same sound, but then depending on what it is that we read, green needle, brainstorm, it seems like two very different sets of words, but somehow this affects what it is that we're actually hearing. So the McGurk effect is a very well-established phenomenon, has been studied for decades, and very curious on how our senses work. I'll let the BBC and the person who is most well known for McGurk effect to introduce this to you, if it works.
At any one moment, we are being bombarded by sensory information. Our brains do a remarkable job of making sense of it all. It seems easy enough to separate the sounds we hear from the sights we see. But there is one illusion that reveals this isn't always the case.
Ba, ba, ba.
Have a look at this.
Ba,
What do you hear?
ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba.
But look what happens when we change the picture.
Ba, ba, ba. Ba, ba, ba. Ba.
And yet, the sound hasn't changed. In every clip, you are only ever hearing ba with a B.
Ba, ba. Ba.
It's an illusion known as the McGurk effect.
Ba.
Take another look.
Ba.
Concentrate first on the right of the screen.
Ba.
Now to the left of the screen.
Ba.
The illusion occurs because what you are seeing clashes with what you are hearing.
In the illusion, what we see overrides what we hear. So the mouth movements we see as we look at a face can actually influence what we believe we're hearing. If we close our eyes, we actually hear the sound as it is. If we open our eyes, we actually see how the mouth movements can influence what we're hearing. Ba, ba, ba.
It's a very curious effect because I think it helps us to immediately realize that reality is constructed. The way that we perceive reality is constructed. You can also see this very easily with animals where they have a sense of smell or a sense of hearing of things that we cannot see or cannot smell. So there's a lot going on in the world that we're trying to interpret without really having a direct impact on it. And sometimes we're very, very wrong. So sometimes there is a misalignment between what is actually being said and what it is that we interpret in our mind. So many times we tend to, I don't know, eyewitness testimony in court. We tend to take that as the best evidence possible, but it's very possible that we're making mistakes. It could be that we forget all sorts of things, but it could be that we just saw the wrong thing. We're very fallible. We're very weak in our ability to really see the world for what it is. It actually keeps on TikTok, like I've collected a bunch of those. Later you can go and watch this, but it gets very, very scary. Like, for example, it's going to be a bit loud. There's just like so many of these things. I think one of my favorites is this one.
That is embarrassing! 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 That is embarrassing!
That is embarrassing. They were not happy with what their team was doing. So this is what they were saying, but there's so many ways to hear this. And if you're not part of the fan group, you're just like being there. Are they talking about Bart Simpson? What does Bart Simpson have to do with anything? Okay. Good. So I think some of these illusions you're probably familiar with. Which desk is longer? Have a look at these two desks. How does our mind interpret this? So our mind does all sorts of things with depth. Our mind tries to make sense of a 2D in order to make this into a 3D perception of the world. So looking at this and looking at that, which seems the longest? The easy way to do this objectively is to just put a ruler. So if you put exactly the same ruler here and there, you'll see that from here it goes 0 to 16, 17, and here it goes from 0 to 20. So this one is longer than this. So there is something that we can't see with our bare eyes, but then there's something that we can do in order to measure objectively whether we're biased or not. So it looks like the left one might be longer, but then if we put something next to it, we see that actually this is not the case and we're off by a lot. So this is a cognitive bias. There is an objective truth. There is a way for us to prove actually what is the length, but there is how we are perceiving that. And we can see whether we're fooling ourselves or not. This is very important from the broader cognitive illusion sort of psychology literature to reflect on what happens to us in judgment and decision making. This is also a very common and popular one. What is the difference between these three rectangles? So over here, you've got something that looks a bit more brownish, one that looks a little bit more oranges, brown again. What is the difference between those? They're exactly the same color. We can take away the context. They're influenced by the context. So just because this one has a brighter context surrounding, it makes it look darker. And then because this one is darker, it makes that one look a little bit brighter. So in order to prove this sort of thing, we can just ignore the context. But sometimes the way that we perceive reality is influenced by the things that are around it. So taking the context out, some people say, but maybe you did something here, you've changed it. This is not the same thing. So you use a different kind of proof in order to put exactly the same color throughout, and then you can see that it is matching the same color. But even here, we can't override this. Still, we see that this is brighter than this, even though we can see that the color is exactly the same. So it's an interesting thing with the McGurk effect. You can study this for 2 decades and you still watch the McGurk effect and you see that happening in front of you. You tell your brain, don't do this, but there's nothing that you can do about this. The brain works automatically. Very famous one, which of the circles is bigger, the left one or the right one, the black one in the middle, and they're exactly the same size, so influenced by the context. I really like this guy. I've been following him on Twitter for many years. Very funky stuff. He studies these sort of things. He wants to know how to manipulate our vision. So a lot of people in our department study vision. They study cognitive psychology. And after a while, you learn how to do these kinds of tricks. And I strongly recommend for you to go on the website or go on his Twitter, follow him. Really groundbreaking work. Every year, there's also a competition for the best illusion. And the team, especially from Japan, is very good at these kinds of things. So some of these can be a little bit difficult to look at because after a while you get a bit dizzy. So some people were saying perhaps it's because of level of stress. Maybe I'm stressed. I'm seeing all kinds of things. It's not very easy and clear what it is that he's doing, and he's able to explain all of this on his website. This is very curious. It seems like things are moving, and it's not moving because something is happening. This is a static image, moving because the way that you're looking at different points on the screen. So just by using a combination of 2 colors, blue and yellow, with black and white, you can influence some kind of movement around it. This is even more curious because you've only got 2 colors, but then there's something about the way that you put it, you put the dots on the left, or do you put it on the right? And there's something about the color of the black and the white that influences a certain direction. So it seems like the outer circle is going in a different direction than the inner circle. All the lines over here are straight. Actually, if you stand where I am right now, it does look very straight, but from where you are, they look a little bit bent, so a little bit difficult to think about this as straight lines. But if you put a ruler into it, you'll see that it is straight. This one looks just like movement. I don't. Very weird to look at this. You can stare at this for hours, like looking at the flow of things. This one also seems like it's moving, even though it's static. This one is really curious because it shows kind of depth. It seems like the red is closer to us than the blue that seems a little bit towards the back. So is this. So you can go and have a look at some of these effects and the names that they give them and how they study them. This is very disturbing. It's an actual image or a portrait of a city. Has outlines, but whenever you're not looking, suddenly all the lines start to get bent. So sometimes it's not, what's changing is not the thing that you're actually looking at, but what's changing is actually the stuff in the background. So all these are sort of like metaphors to the stuff that we'll look at in judgment and decision making. This is fantastic. I love this. This is one of the latest that I've seen. What do you see over here? What does this show? A what? A deer, yeah. No, but sometimes it's also kind of like a metaphor. It's not cheese. But a metaphor is that sometimes we see something and it looks one way, but then we twist it around and then it looks something completely different. So I'll twist it around, and look at this. And then suddenly it's something completely different. So it's quite amazing how we got from this to this. So this is reality. So wood carvings. But the depth is completely reversed, right? So here it looks like the deer is closer to us. But over here, where is the deer? Just a bunch of wood carvings next to each other. So sometimes you just need to look from a different perspective, change the way that you look at something, and then your perspective on this changes. So when you see something, and it could be a piece of evidence, and information that's shared on Twitter, on Facebook, and you're sure that this is reality. There's a deer here, right? But sometimes all you need to do is change your perspective slightly, look at this from a different angle, investigate this evidence from other people's perspective, ask them what it is that they see, and then you'll realize that what you're looking at is not a deer, but actually something to be different. So really, there is a competition for cognitive illusions every year. There's a bunch of things that you can do with these. It's not just with images. Some people actually do this with the physical world. And it's nice because there's a trend right now in the world of doing cognitive illusion museums. And I visited, I think, 3 of those. The last one was in Dubai. And it's really fun because you get to go to different rooms and play with these and look at this from different directions. Things that look impossible, a little bit like MC Escher, the Dutch cognitive illusionist, such graphic designer that became very, very famous. So now people compete with this. If you look at this the way that it seems for us right now, but if you look at this from a different perspective, then something completely changes. This is a very famous MC Escher kind of thing, where it looks like going down, but it's actually going up. Here it's playing with the shadows. Yeah, so it's interesting just how easy it is to fool us with all these kinds of little games. This one as well. Like at the beginning, you think you see something, but then every second something shifts here in the way that you perceive the actual image. So sometimes just by some movement, changing something within the image, within the object, you can see that it shifts your perspective about things. So every time I watch this, it just blows my mind with how wonderful this is. How to interpret this? What is reality? What is this object? How to construct these things? Very curious things happening within vision. So all this is good and nice. How is this related to judgment and decision making and doing some good in the world? So I'm not going to go too much into detail right now. We're going to come back and do with these things later. This is an actual example. I think this is in Sweden somewhere, where they've constructed these very interesting crosswalk. You see what's happening with this crosswalk? What is happening? It looks like the crosswalk is floating, which makes drivers get a little bit scared when they're driving very fast. So when they approach the crosswalk, they think maybe they're going to hit the crosswalk. So pedestrians are going through this. This is a street where a lot of drivers tended to drive very fast, and then safety of pedestrians is very important to us. So in order to try and do something, in order to get some of the drivers to slow down and consider that there's a crosswalk over here. This is a regular crosswalk over here on the left. This is what we're used to. But what they've added over here is just a little bit of depth. So they've used the cognitive illusion in order to create something just for the drivers coming from that side. So I'll give you an example with a video of what that looks like. Okay, I think you get the gist, the idea, right? So this simple manipulation is something that we call a nudge. We use cognitive illusions sometimes in order to get people to behave in a slightly different way. And here the desirable behavior is for drivers to slow down a little bit. In order to slow down, we can do all sorts of things. We can put signs or we can put a crosswalk, but sometimes it's not enough. So we change something about the environment. Perfect. I was going to ask you if you had some recommendations on how to improve this and what are the possible challenges here. I completely agree with everything that you just said. I'm not sure that this is a good manipulation. I'm not sure what this is supposed to do exactly. I agree that, first of all, it's probably only going to work once or maybe twice, so it's something that is a one-off. But sometimes that is already like a big effect. It could be that for the majority, at least this is what they'll claim, for the majority of the new drivers going through that, you know, this is what can you achieve with a little bit of paint. Regarding the possible downside to this, it could be very scary for drivers. It could lead to all sorts of things where people react in a way that's not expected. So now I'm going to reflect the question back to you. How to make this better, or how do we know whether this is good or bad? What to do in this situation in order to really assess whether this is a good intervention or not? Yeah, good. So this is to see whether this is effective or not. So we'll want to do a bit of randomizing to, let's say, alternate days, what's called A/B testing, to see one day it's painted, one day it's not painted. Maybe try this not only in this intersection, another intersection, and vary these kinds of things to test, is this really leading to the desired outcome? But your friend here had some concerns. How would you address the concerns of perhaps people who are going to create some traffic jam and get out of the car and check some things? What would you do in order to include this in your experiment? Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. Yes, good. So we want a lot of measures. We want the measure of whether they're actually slowing down. We want a measure of whether they're getting out of their cars in order to check what is going on over there. We can even look at the numbers of the vehicles and see, let's say we're looking at this in a 2-week period and we're alternating whether this exists or not. So we can take away the paint and bring it back, paint, take it away and bring it back. And then see if the exact same car that comes in drives through that regularly every day. Does it react to this? Yes or no, and to what extent? They see this more than one time. So this is a terrific experiment to run. But like you, I have concerns as well. I want to know whether this is really working, which is why we don't take anything for granted. Whatever it is that we do an intervention on, we want to test it. And we need to put our scientist hat in order to construct an experiment and address both measuring the benefit and addressing all sorts of possible concerns to see that we're not actually creating a problem, a much bigger problem. It also could be, and I think some people actually raised this over here, it could be that people, so this became a very Instagrammable place. So suddenly, of course, people want to take an Instagram in the middle of the road. This is not exactly what you wanted to do here. And this is an unanticipated kind of behavior. I don't think when people constructed this, they thought, oh, people are going to flock from all over Sweden in order to take a photo in the middle of the street, jumping on these things. So human psychology, human psyche is very complicated. You don't really know what to expect, which is why you have to test this rigorously. And even when you test this rigorously, it could be that there are some very unexpected things that might occur. Very good points made about don't take for granted that whatever it is that I'm showing you is going to completely work and all the time. Very good questions, and thank you for the suggested experiment. Another nudge, and this is something that's very curious. So for example, here on the left, we've got a fitness center that's open 24 hours. I feel like we have this a lot in Hong Kong. So you've got a few paths, right? One path is regular kind of stairs, and then you've got an electric escalator. And people who are going to work out at the gym, the whole purpose is to work out, but they'll take the escalators rather than take the stairs. It's really interesting to see what happens in human behavior or some of the misalignments between those things because they want to go to what's familiar to them in the fitness center and the routine that they have, not even thinking of the regular workout that they might get just by doing things in their everyday lives. So when was the last time that you took the stairs in Hong Kong to anything? I took the stairs coming up here to the first floor, but even that felt very strange to me. But when I was living in the Netherlands, it was almost perceived to be wrong to take the elevator. If I would take the elevator, people would ask me, "Are you feeling okay today?" And I was on the 5th floor, and they had a lot of different nudges to help people to go on the stairs rather than the elevator. So from the door, let's say that you walked into a place where you can choose between the stairs and the elevators, you had footsteps that are actually going to the side of the stairs rather than the elevators. On the elevators, there were big signs about how much of carbon, on how much emissions is, every time that you take the elevator, how much this is going to burn. Plus, the last thing I just want to say this is that on the stairs at Maastricht University, there was a calorie count. So for every stair, I think it was like half a calorie or a third of a calorie. So giving you like a heads up of how much you're going to do better by burning some calories taking the stairs. Here you see, I want to climb the stairs to fitness. So these kinds of little nudges in order to get people to behave a little bit more healthy for them. Just using everyday life behaviors. Yeah. So the question was, is there something unethical about this? I'm guessing you have an opinion since you raised this. What's your perspective on this? Let's start with this, okay? Just this is fine. So what could be about these kinds of things that might make it seem unethical? But just before we go ahead with this, does somebody think that there's something unethical about this or something problematic about this? Do you perceive any problem? No? Okay. What kind of situations can this become unethical? Where can this become problematic? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. Can you give an example? Can you think of an example? Okay. Great. Okay. So you were raising the point of perhaps this is not to help the individual whose behavior we're influencing, but it is to benefit somebody else. We're not really clear on what kind of situation that might be. Did you want to say something? Yeah. Yeah, okay. So one concern is that perhaps when there are some established norms that in this case have been nudged towards the stairs, if you don't take the stairs and you do take the elevator, which seems like a reasonable thing to do, especially if you have some physical disability or pregnant, elderly, or just not feeling very well, or just like wanting to take the easy way up, it's completely okay and reasonable. But then society judges you for that. So perhaps less tolerance, less inclusivity towards that. I think for the Dutch, they perceive themselves to be a very inclusive, equitable kind of society. So it is a question. I think they will take a big concern over this. I think the point is not to judge somebody that is not behaving according to norm, at least in Maastricht University, but it is to see whether there's something that they can do to support or there's something they can do to care. Sometimes I'm amazed by how much we just don't look at each other here at HKU. If we do see somebody who might need our help, we don't do much about it. But at least over there, I felt like things are different. But the concern is very, very real. And thank you for bringing that, because we do need to take these into consideration. We do need to think about the side effects of what that might be. And when we're nudging into a certain direction, we need to consider how does a violation of this might seem. So I'll give you an example for what I think you have had in mind is, let's say in the United States, when I went to have my driver's license when I was living in Illinois, you are automatically enrolled into becoming an organ donor. So this is the default mode. And in order to opt out from that, you need to fill in a form which has a lot of friction. You need to go through a form, you need to submit this, go to the mail, put this in. You need to go through all sorts of. So Illinois is one of the states that decided, a little bit like the Scandinavian countries and some countries around the world, to do an opt out. So by default, you are going to donate your organs to somebody in need. Now, the basic thinking behind this is that you're dead. There's nothing much that you would have to say about this, but some people have a lot of concerns about this because of religion, because of other things, other beliefs in life. So we're going to have a whole session about these kinds of nudges. What does it mean? How can we implement this? And the care that we need to think about what does it mean for us to change somebody's behavior in order not to benefit them, but to benefit somebody else. A very good concern. You wanted to say something? Oh, you need the reward. Yeah. Reward. Yeah. So if you feel like you're getting a reward for something that you're doing, then when you're not given that reward, you won't do this. That's a good point. Some of the, when you go to training for how to teach at HKU, because there's this general stereotype that people don't participate in class, there are all sorts of nudges that we're supposed to implement, like giving you cards when you participate. Oh, you participate. Okay, here's a card. And then it's going to give you some grades at the end. Did you have this at HKU? Did somebody ever see this kind of thing? I've seen this at HKUST. It's a very interesting kind of thing, because once you take away the reward, like nobody is oh, I'm not getting my card. Okay, no participation for me anymore. So definitely in psychology, there's this tension between how much do you want to use incentives. If you ask an economist, how do you change behavior? An economist, incentives. You either tax in order to reduce a certain behavior, or you give people motivation by rewarding the kind of behavior. But as psychologists, we know that this is a problem. There's extrinsic motivation, there's intrinsic motivation, and it doesn't always go in the same direction. It's sometimes in the opposite direction. Good. So you're asking good questions, and you're raising a lot of key concepts, words like habit, how to build a habit, and what is the role of these nudges? What are these nudges actually supposed to do? What are they supposed to elicit? So these are all very good questions, and we're gonna tackle all of those. There's gonna be also some readings on that. Katie Milkman does a really good thing about creating habits. So we are gonna talk about all these things. Excellent questions. So keep those in mind for the rest of the session. I'll just before we go for a quick break, I'll show you one other nudge. If you've had concerns over the nudges so far, I think you also have concern about this one. I just forgot to define what a nudge is. We'll come back to this, don't worry. But generally, the nudge is there's something in the choice architecture. It's not taking away a choice that you have. You still have the choice of taking the escalators or the stairs. You still have the choice of speeding through a street. You still have the choice of doing something. But the way that you, as an architecture of choice, the way that you construct the environment gets the person to shift it to a certain direction rather than the opposite. This sounds a little bit like the opposite, or some people would say in exactly the same direction as marketing. I aim to help people, individuals, see what it is that's happening in their choice architecture in order to make the right decision. The people in the choice architecture nudging compared to their marketing just consider themselves to have more paternalistic sort of influence where they know what is better for the greater good. But we'll have a discussion on this as well. just to show you in this direction, also something with escalators is a nudge that builds on the notion of fun. I think over there you can ask many of the questions that you also ask about the traffic. Let's see how this works. Effective, not effective? Is this a real solution? Should we use this in every stairs next to escalators? Don't know. Think about this. Go for a break, refresh yourself, and we'll come back in 5 minutes. From cognitive illusions, we somehow got to nudging because the nudge was on a cognitive illusion. But going back to the point of cognitive illusion is just to show us that sometimes the way that we perceive reality is not the objective reality. So in this course, we'll try and understand our biases. What is our bias? What is it that we're not seeing? Perhaps changing our perspective, perhaps looking at the context, perhaps putting this into an experiment in order to understand to what extent are we biased? Where is this bias? Almost in every session, I'll show you a bias. We'll do an experiment together, hands-on in this in the class, and then we'll reflect on what is the bias, how to fix this, what does the bias mean, what are the implications for this bias for real life, for behavior, cognition, feelings. But sometimes in judgment and decision making, we even study magic. So I think magicians are very good at creating an alternative reality where what they're doing seems like it's operating in one way, but what is actually happening in reality is something different. So it used to be that people believed in magic, but now we just see magicians as very advanced tricksters. And it's nice that there's entire websites and YouTube channels that are dedicated in order to show us what it is that we're not seeing. This is another TikTok sort of illusion that blew up. Try and follow what the guy is doing. Quick, remember a card, and then see if this works on you. I'll show you where I watched this when I took a flight in a second.
Quick, remember a card. Now, you could have thought of any one of these cards, okay? But watch this. If I just take the cards, bring it onto the water bottle like this, you'll notice something crazy happens with this water bottle. Because look, if you just open up the water bottle, inside you will find a playing card. And would the playing card have been your 8 of spades? Let me know if I got it right in the comments down below.
Did he get it right for you? How many of you did he get it right? Some of you, most of you? Yeah. Here's a more elaborate version of this. So I grew up in Israel, and I fly every once in a while to see my family, and I was very surprised. One of the most famous Israelis right now is a mentalist illusionist, Leo, and he's the one who's doing the safety instructions for El Al. So it's very weird. I'll show you what that looks like.
Welcome aboard this El Al Boeing 787 Dreamliner aircraft. I'm Lior Suchard, a mentalist. Before we begin, let's try something. I'm going to flick through this deck, and I want you to try to see one card inside. Ready? Nah, that was too fast. I'll do it again. Did you get one? Try to remember it till the end of the video.
Did you have one? Yeah. Now, what's nice about this is that all the cognitive illusions that I've shown you were in this video. So Elal was using this for a safety briefing. I'm like, oh my God, this is the stuff that we do in my class. So almost every one of these things is a beautiful cognitive illusion.
During takeoff and landing, make sure that your tray table is stowed and the seat is in an upright position.
So he's doing a bunch of those. Since you've seen safety instructions, we're not going to do the whole thing. We're just going to go to the end.
Oh, almost forgot. Remember your card?
Did it work as well? It did. So what is the trick here? How to do this? It's slowing down on a specific card. In what way? So when you say slow down, what does that mean? Pauses. Yeah, milliseconds, right? Something you want to say? Delay, right? So even though I've watched this many times and I try to tell myself, don't focus on that card, focus on other cards. I'm like, this is the card that I still see. So this is a very simple trick. The question, of course, is how does he do this? Like, how does he do this very, very brief delay? And it's an amazing training that some magicians do. So when somebody calls themselves a magician, an illusionist, or a mentalist, you want to take this, in perspective and say this. The interesting stuff is that we study this kind of stuff. We write papers on this sort of thing. So for example, here is a paper from not too long ago, influencing choice without awareness, and they actually hired magicians, to run this. So if you want to do some interesting magic kind of studies, judgment and decision making is the right place for you. So the magician could influence the choice almost every time, so 98% of the time, and they're explaining how this is done, and you're right, of course, it's about the millisecond delay on a specific card and how to construct this. But then you ask people, are you aware that this is what the magician is doing? So you've seen 2 videos of this, and you started thinking, putting your scientist hat, what is going on? How is this guy influencing me? What is the sort of thing that is going on over here? And you nailed it pretty fast. But when people were asked, how does he do this? Only 9% were able to guess this. So just imagine the kind of impact. So some magicians, policymakers, sometimes marketing people, when we walk into the shopping mall, are influenced by all this sort of thing. 98% they get us, but only 9% of the time do we see that we're actually being influenced. Here's your ethicality, right? Something unethical might be going on over here. And this is a force that could be used for bad, like very bad. Yeah, want to say something? Yeah, subliminal kind of priming. So the claim was that if you flash in something that people are not even aware of, so below your level of awareness, flashing also things like popcorn or Coke or something like that, it will get people to buy a little bit more. So not necessarily the case, although we run a lot of studies in the lab looking at subliminal kind of priming and whether this works. It has some kind of influences some of the time, but not in the context of the movie the way that they implemented that. But it was such a concern that I think laws came out to try and ban this, to prevent this from actually happening. So for a very long time, there was a concern over this. For a very long time, companies were sure that this is somehow affecting people's behaviors. But we do need to study this in order to see whether this is really influencing people's behavior. So very interesting stuff that some people are doing in the domain of judgment, decision making, and illusions. And we want to know these kind of things because we want to be able to kind of educate people about this. So this is happening. We want to make sure that people don't take this into the wrong direction by following false gods and prophets in assuming that what it is that people are doing to them is the one true way of looking at things. And there is sort of a way of studying free will. I did my PhD on the belief in free will, whether people believe that they have free will or not. Is free will real or not? Do we have free will? Is this all one big illusion? Do we all live in the matrix? Lots of interesting questions, and you can study these kinds of things in social psychology and judgment and decision making. How many characters are in this image? Count those. To me, it took about a minute to realize that there's something very wrong with this photo. It seems like for you, this happened a lot faster, because at the beginning, I'm like, yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. But then after a while, you start noticing what is going on with this image. Are you familiar with some famous experiment that is a little bit like that, about not noticing something if you have a task? Yes? The invisible gorilla, yeah. You did? In marketing? Okay, terrific. Was there a point beyond the invisible gorilla? Did they make a point for... Ah, right. Nobody noticed. Right. It is amazing. We're going to have a whole session about this, not marketing related, but definitely about us not noticing all sorts of things. And even when we think that we notice one thing, there's like a million other things that are happening around it that we don't notice. So very limited cognition. What was the point for marketing? What was he trying to tell you about marketing? I'm curious. Yeah. Okay, so you're seeing a little bit of the evil side and a little bit of the good side. Okay, so hopefully we'll get... Yeah, it's quite disturbing, this kind of thing. So we need to take this into account. Did he discuss some examples in marketing with you, or not yet? Not yet. Okay. So if he does, please bring it back. We want to discuss this here as well, to try and fight this somehow. But we do want to know how we're being influenced by marketing to buy more things. You wanted to say something? Yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah. We have an exercise. I'm not going to do this in this class, but I've done this with a previous class where the data set that they had to explore, like looking at a correlation, the plot of the correlation looked like a gorilla. So it's like we have a lot of fun with this. People not noticing all sorts of patterns, or dinosaurs, or all sorts of these kinds of things. So invisible gorilla, very, very famous. We're going to have a session dedicated to all these things that we don't notice, and how to bring this into attention. So we definitely study this kind of stuff in judgment and decision making, looking at focus, distractions. What is it that we don't see when we look at something that's very specific? What do you see over here? What's special about this image? There's a grid. Yeah, because it's black and white. It's a black and white image, but we do see color, and the color comes from the grid that you identified. So sometimes something looks to us a certain way, but if you look deeper into it, actually it's black and white, and the only thing that has color is this grid, and this is how we construct color. So our mind blends things, paints what it is that's black in the colors that come from the grid. Quite exceptional. So that's another very interesting thing to study in the way that we construe reality in our brains. And the main point that I wanted for you to take away from this is that both in cognitive illusions and biases and magic, and in judgment decision making, just being aware of the bias does not mean that you're able to control it better. So Daniel Kahneman, who we discussed in the last session, who is the Nobel Prize winning in behavioral economics, and a psychologist, who every time he's interviewed, people are saying, so what are your tricks to make sure that you're not biased, that you're making the optimal decisions? And he's like, I've studied this my whole life. I'm the one who created this kind of domain. I'm more biased than anybody else. Being an expert on biases does not mean that you're not going to make errors in a different kind of bias. We're all biased. Sometimes having this bias means that we can't really control this. All we can do is reflect on it And sometimes we need to stop ourselves because we already know that we have an immediate reaction. Take some time to contemplate and then think what it is that just happened in order to make a more accurate, slow judgment of things. So how do we process information? How do we make evaluations? How do we make decisions? We're going to run a few experiments from Daniel Kahneman and his stuff. Perhaps some of these you've seen before. I'll ask you to open your laptops or your mobiles to join on the Mentimeter. And we'll go to the first one here. Okay, so we have two sets of organizations. This was in the year 2003. And the question is, which group, Group A or Group B, had the larger total sales revenue in 2003? As you're answering this, think first, what is your immediate gut reaction? How do you solve this puzzle? And then think what other people, how they are going to approach this. And then perhaps what is reality? What is the real answer here? So Group A is Reebok International, Hilton Hotels, Starbucks, Radio Shack is no longer, but in 2003 that was a big chain. Hershey, which is a very big kind of chocolate company in the US. Group B, ConocoPhillips, American International Group, McKesson, Mary Bergen, and Altair Group. So which one of those is a larger revenue sales in the year 2003? How to approach this? As you're answering, now I want to make a decision, Group A or Group B. I can just guess, but how to make a good guess? Yeah, let's not Google things. Let's say that you don't have access to Google, Wikipedia. You need to make an immediate decision based on these two. What kind of, sorry? Familiarity, terrific. So how would you make a decision based on familiarity? Yeah, I'm very familiar with Reebok, Hilton Hotel, Starbucks, that we have one in the campus, used to have two a year ago or two. So it's go with a familiar, right? What other cues are available for us here aside from the familiarity? What other things can we look at? Yes, please. So based on what we think happened in 2003, to try, so why Group B? Because oh, okay, yeah, because the time changed. We're very familiar with Starbucks and Reebok, but we're not familiar with this. It could be that this is kind of shifting our minds, but it could be that these were very familiar in 2003, right? Let me help you in this case. They were not familiar in 2003. So we're still going with A, right? Any reason why we would want to go with B? Yes? Probably a trick question because we're in a judgment decision making, but let's say that we want to overcome this trick. Yeah. What else is here that might? Yeah. Source. What else? This is a good keyword. What other keyword? International. What other keyword? Group. It's a group. Right? So these are the owners of these brands. So they own these brands and a lot more, right? So sometimes a little bit, I think, what is it? Meta and Facebook. So Facebook is a big company, we all know it, but Meta is the one that owns Facebook and a bunch of other things, Instagram and so forth. Google, it's, what is it? Alpha, Beta, something, right? Something like that. What other big? PepsiCo. There's all sorts of other, these big groups that are actually owning a lot of brands. So brands are very familiar. If we go with familiarity, this is a good cue, but just like you said, this might be a trick. So Group B, the student model A. So many of you were able to overcome the bias that many other people have towards Group A. So Danny Kahneman was showing that in Group A is the more chosen one because people go with what's available. It's called the availability heuristic. Whatever comes to mind first, you say, okay, yeah, I'm familiar with this. I'll go with the safer answer. This is a case study from my own experience. So in Israel, I did an MBA. And my question to you is, the best student in my MBA class in Israel used to write poetry and was rather shy and small in size. Do your best to guess what was the student's undergraduate major. So the major in undergraduate was Chinese studies or economics. Good. So how to approach this, given what we know from the first question? Yes, please. Right. So in this case, let's make this about this case. What do you see? Literature related because they write poetry. So there is information in the text that would lead you to suggest that this is which one of those? Chinese studies or economics? Yeah, right. Availability heuristic, representative heuristic, we tend to go for the Chinese one. However, you want to keep going? Yes, please. It's an MBA class. Yeah, Masters of Business Administration. Yes. Yeah, very good piece of information. Terrific. What other pieces of information do we have? That's terrific. Yes, thank you. So it seems more plausible that if somebody goes to a master's in business administration that they did an undergraduate in economics. But what is the biggest indicator that we have over here for what is the right answer? Is the what? The place, Israel? Okay, what is it about Israel? Yeah, that's a good cue. Yeah, good point. So just try and guess for economics and Chinese studies. How big are these? How many people in Israel do you think learn Chinese studies and how people learn economics? Actually, you don't even have to go to Israel, even at HKU. Which one is the bigger one? A lot more people go to economics, right? So the base factor, so taking the rate comparison between economics and Chinese studies, even if you ignore everything, ignore the MBA, ignore the shy, ignore everything about poetry, just compare these two. If you need the best guess, you ask yourself, what are the rates? How many people are actually studying in these, right? And then you can incorporate information like MBA. How likely are those to join MBA? When it comes to MBA, how many Chinese undergraduates? Almost none. It's almost impossible unless they do some makeup studies. Most of them have to come from something like economics. So availability heuristic, representativeness, all these come to mind, but sometimes we avoid the most important piece of information, which is what are the rates for these? How many students do we have in each one of these, right? Yeah. So some people, about nine of us, kind of shifted towards the Chinese studies because poetry, I don't know what it means, but small and shy. I don't know how this influences Chinese, but elicits all kind of stereotypes or maybe stigmas about people who might be studying, or perhaps it's just a link to literature, something about poetry, Chinese studies, literature. So people are making all kinds of links, but sometimes if we take a step, we think about this and we think which is the most important piece of evidence that we have over here to make a decision, then we shift. Same we can do about gender. I think most typically people here assume all sorts of things, shy and small in size, leads to more females. But if you look, unfortunately, especially when I was doing the MBA a long time ago, definitely very male dominated. And unfortunately, in Hong Kong, still the rates are not in favor, at least in MBA, not in favor of females, although they are catching up very fast. One of the things I really hope to see is that not only are they doing more MBA, but also getting the jobs, because unfortunately, at least in Hong Kong, it seems like those who are getting the jobs are more male rather than female. So in the first one, adapted from Kahneman, group A, group B, the right answer is group B, so availability heuristic bias. The student undergraduate major, Chinese studies or economics, male or female, the right answer is economics if we just look at the rate. And males are still unfortunately more represented. Here is a final one about ranking. So there's no Mentimeter for this. It's a little bit more elaborate than Mentimeter, but I'll ask you to kind of do this in your head. Please try and rank and estimate the following causes of death in the United States between the 1990s and the year 2000, ranked from 1 to 5. So which one is the highest death rate? With a population in the US now it's 330, back then 300 million. So which is the biggest cause of death? And also try and put some kind of a number. What is your estimated number of deaths for that decade from tobacco, poor diet, physical inactivity, motor vehicle accidents, firearms, or illicit drug use? So think about this. First, what is your immediate reaction to this? So when you see this, what does your gut tell you that is the right answer? And take a moment, think about this, and think whether there's some cues over here or things that we need to overcome in order to get to the right answer. Take a moment, think about this. Try to rank them and also try to give a number. Just how much more is the number 1 compared to number 2 or number 3? Do you have an idea? Do you have something in mind? Which is the number 1 killer in the 1990s in the United States? Yes? Sorry? Motor vehicle accidents? Why would you guess that? The number 1 cause of death in every country is motor. Okay, interesting. So you read something, you vaguely recall that, and you're using this here. Which is the least? Okay, that is the least one. So let's do by a show of hands. How many of you think tobacco is the number 1 killer in the 1990s? 1, 2, okay. How many of you think poor diet, physical inactivity? Oh, a few more hands, about 5 or 6, 7, okay. Motor vehicle accidents, 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, more, 8, okay. Firearms, not so much. Illicit drug use, illicit drug use, yeah. The drug use, 3, yeah. Okay, interesting. So we have kind of like a basic, I think most of the guesses were about poor diet, physical inactivity, and motor vehicle accident. Now, what might be wrong about our guesses? What might be influencing our guesses? So prior reading and knowledge, what else? Sorry? Media report. This is very important. Can you give an example? Yeah. Right. Yeah, so there's some things over here that tend to be reported in the media a lot more than others. What does the media focus on the most over here? Sorry, firearms, yeah. So people tend to think firearms are, because they are more available. We see this in the news all the time, yeah? Yeah, there's a threat to society. Something is happening just outside your door. Be afraid, right? So what is the purpose of media? What does media do? Most of the purpose of a newspaper is to what? Sorry? To inform. I don't know, manipulate, but what to sell? Newspapers are evaluated by their sales, right? So their aim is to sell as much as possible. What sells? The most outrageous sort of things. Big threat to us, big threat to society, right? Only if there's a big story behind it will we make the newspaper. And there's some things that sell more than other things, right? So if we just take a look at this, actually this is in the right order. So tobacco is the number 1 killer. You can see this about 435,000 compared to firearms and illicit drug use. Can you see the differences between those? But we don't perceive it to be that way because media, especially today. So this is an experiment from the 2000s, where internet was just starting out. You're not familiar with the world without internet. I am very familiar with it. Where we're influenced most by the radio, TV, and the newspapers. Today, with clickbait and social media, it's a lot worse because it's not just informing media outlets, but it's a lot of individuals that are putting stuff out there. And then you've got these algorithms by Google, Meta, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, TikTok. They have these algorithms. The only purpose that they have is not to inform, for you to stay as long as possible and click as much as possible on the ads, right? So if we look at these things, this is causes of death in the US. This is an amazing website called The World, Our World in Data. So when you want to know something, just go and have a look. Now, I grew up in Israel. I don't know what you know about Israel, but growing up in Israel has not been easy. A lot of issues with terrorism up till today. Like when I visited Israel just this year, there was rockets coming in and you have to run to the shelter every once in a while. We're very influenced by terrorism. If you open an Israeli newspaper, this is like the New York Times and this is the Guardian. What takes most of the headlines? Terrorism, homicide, suicide. This is what we want to know. Be careful, be aware. If you grow in Israel or grow up in Israel and you spend there long enough, you're kind of like, this is actually much safer than if you go to other places in the world. Like I live not too far away from Chicago. If you go into the wrong neighborhood in Chicago, you're going to be in trouble. And actually, many of these things you realize are much lower rates, causes of death than many other things. What is the biggest killer right now in the US? Heart disease, cancer. How many media sources report on heart disease and cancer? Not many. If you look at this, it's less than 15%. So what happens in New York Times and The Guardian? What happens about what people care about and what they search? And then what actually happens in reality? There's a big misalignment over here. So we want to get people to care about what is important. We need to help them to make sure that they know that the #1 killer is actually heart disease. Perhaps it is an ethical, moral obligation for us to get them to take the stairs, because otherwise it might kill them. Perhaps it's a moral obligation to divert money from army to fighting cancer. Perhaps it's our moral obligation to make sure that these are better aligned. Should we do something with the newspapers to make sure that they report the right thing? Should we make the social media networks tell us the information the way that it really is and not being biased by other things? So in judgment and decision making, we really care about these kinds of things. We care about these misalignments, and we try to construct a choice architecture and an information architecture that would allow you access to the best information to make the best choice for you, so that you can live longer, so you can avoid the worst kind of death. I'm going to touch on this very briefly, and with this, we're going to end this session. Factfulness, wonderful. Hans Rosling is an icon. Unfortunately, he passed away 3 years ago, but his son and family continue with his endeavor. And Steven Pinker, he's a big thinker in social psychology, a little bit of language as well. So we're going to be talking about all these things. But I love this headline because it's very, very important that we know this about our world. 10 reasons we're wrong about the world and why things are actually better than you think, even with the pandemic, even when we have war in the Ukraine, even when we have all these things are happening. We need to base ourselves on facts. And there are ways for us to look at facts. And Hans Rosling has done a remarkable job with Gapminder in order to make data available for us so that we can go and check the data, not rely on the news or what's available to us immediately in our recollection, but go and base ourselves on real data. So I'll finish kind of with Hans Rosling. He's amazing. This is one of his first TED Talks where he presented Gapminder. But Gapminder right now is above and beyond, 2 decades later. it's an amazing tool based on the best sources of information.
Poland, Russia, Pakistan, and South Africa. And these.
So he gives his Swedish students a test just to see their basic knowledge about the world. Which country has the highest child mortality? Sri Lanka or Turkey, Poland or South Korea, Malaysia, Russia. And basically what this is looking at is stereotypes and stigma about which one. So there's a real answer to this, and most of the Swedish students do not seem to know what the answer is, and he plays around with this and takes this even further.
These were the results of the Swedish students. I did it, so I got a confidence interval which was pretty narrow, and I got happy, of course. I had 1.8 right answer out of 5 possible. That means that there was a place for a professor of international health and for my course. But one late night, when I was compiling the report, I really realized my discovery. I have shown that Swedish top students know statistically significantly less about the world than the chimpanzees. Because the chimpanzee would score half right. If I gave them 2 bananas with Sri Lanka and Turkey, they would be right half of the cases. But the students are not there. The problem for me was not ignorance, it was preconceived ideas. I did also an unethical study of the professors of the Karolinska Institute that hands out the Nobel Prize in medicine, and they are on par with the chimpanzee there. So this is where I realized that there was really a need to communicate, because the data of what's happening in the world and the child health of every country is very well aware. So we did this software which displays it like this. Every bubble here is a country. This country over here is, this is China. This is India. The size of the bubble is the population. And on this axis here, I put fertility rate. Because my students, what they said when they looked upon the world, and I asked them, what do you really think about the world? Huh? Well, I first discovered that the textbook was Tintin mainly. And they said the world is still we and them. And we is Western world, and them is third world. And what do you mean with Western world? I said, well, that's long life in small family, and third world is short life in large family. So this is what I could display here. I put fertility rate here, number of children per woman, 1, 2, 3, 4, up to about 8 children per woman. We have very good data since 1962, 1960 about, on the size of families in all countries. The error margin is narrow. Here I put life expectancy at birth, from 30 years in some countries up to about 70 years. And 1962, there was really a group of countries here that was industrialized countries, and they had small families and long lives. And these were the developing countries. They had large families and they had relatively short lives. Now, what has happened since 1962? We want to see the change. Are the students right? It's still 2 types of countries? Or have these developing countries got smaller families and they live here? Or have they got longer lives and live up there? Let's see. We start the world. And this is all UN statistic that has been available. Here we go. Can you see there? It's China. They're moving against better health. They're improving there. All the green Latin American countries, they are moving towards smaller families. The yellow ones here are the Arabic countries, and they get larger families, but longer lives, but not larger families. The Africans are the green down here, they still remain here. This is India. Indonesia is moving on pretty fast. And in the 80s here, you have Bangladesh still among the African countries there, but now Bangladesh, it's a miracle that happens in the 80s. The imams start to promote family planning, and they move up into that corner. And in 90s, we have the terrible HIV epidemic that takes down the life expectancy of the African countries, and all the rest of the world moves up into the corner where we have long lives and small family, and we have a completely new world.
Yeah, so it's quite amazing. You can actually go in and play with this. It's a very, very interesting website where you can actually put all that information and see stuff for yourself. Basically what Hans is saying, base your knowledge on facts. And now facts are so accessible that you can form any kind, you can gain knowledge about real life from hands-on experience. So this is just to summarize everything that we've gone through today. So there's cognitive biases, and they kind of take our attention away from what the world is. And we need to overcome some of these biases when we want to know what is actually happening. So you can use tools like that to put income, life expectancy, roll this from the 1800s. You can even choose different countries. You can play around with this and see. So we have a bunch of tools: judgment, decision making, health, social psychology, in order to overcome some of these biases, in order to make more optimal decisions. And we'll work on this together in order to help others do better choices for the greater good. Any questions that you have about the syllabus, about the course, write to me on Slack, tag me by my name, and I'll answer over there. Hopefully see you next week. Thank you.